forward. Sorry, I was reading Sarah's chats. Hi, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us today for our workshop on storytelling with Jen Rubin. I first want to say thanks to Dane Arts. Dane Arts makes our workshops possible. And without the support of the county and Dane Arts and Mark, these workshops would not be possible. So we've been doing weekly Wednesday or bi-weekly Wednesday workshops, helping artists and creatives learn new skills and build their business toolbox so they can be stronger and more productive, just bring their business forward, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I want to remind you real quick that we do have another workshop coming up on August 12th. It's about DABL. That's the Dane Arts Professional Artist Registry. That is coming up, and we're going to learn a little bit about the updates they've done and how artists can participate in that registry through the county. And it's daneartsregistry.com if you want to check it out. We'll put that information in the chat box so you can always grab that off of there. I want to remind you also to hop on Dane Arts website and sign up for their newsletter. That's how you're going to stay up to date and up to speed on everything that's going on within the county as it comes to art and culture and creativity. So make sure you sign up for that. You can also check out daneartsmuralarts.org. That is the program that the county created with some mural arts program throughout the county. It's pretty amazing. You've seen their work, I'm sure, in places that you've gone. So I think those are all my quick updates. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Rubin, our esteemed presenter today. Jen.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me to come and do a storytelling workshop. Just real briefly, I've been doing storytelling workshops for many years in Madison. I co-produce The Moth in Madison, and I co-host a storytelling workshop. And so I've done this workshop a lot. I've tinkered with it to have it work over Zoom. So it's in person, it's a very interactive and engaging workshop. And so we'll try and do a couple things with the breakout rooms. I'm not going to take the time to have everyone introduce themselves because we only have until 8 o'clock and that takes a little bit of a while. So I looked through what Megan sent me about you. Some of you said why you were interested in this. You know, storytelling is useful for so many reasons. It's not just to get up on stage and tell a story. It's useful for grant writing. It's useful if you're a journalist or you're a writer. Some of you want help with your book, someone with a documentary. Not everyone came, so I don't know. But what we're going to talk about today is all useful for that. So let me just tell you what we're going to do over the next 50 minutes. I sort of distilled my workshop down to 3 things that I think work well over Zoom. With storytelling, we all have so many stories that we could tell about ourselves. I know we all have like our favorite go-to stories, but we all have stories, but sometimes people get stuck like, well, what's the story I want to tell? Or I only have these 3 stories. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about prompts and how you kind of compose stories from your life. But really the skill of it, kind of the meat of this is like, how do you take this story, which is really an anecdote, like this thing that happened to you, or this thing you experienced, or this thing you saw, and how do you build it out to be like a more fully fledged story? You know, how do you connect it to a more universal theme that people connect with? And so we're going to go through sort of what I think of as the 5 steps to how do you get from the anecdote to the story. So that's going to take the hour. So that's what we're going to do. I think there's only, there's 9 of you on here. So, you know, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question at any point in time. I know most of you don't have your video up. And so if that's because of bandwidth on your phone, that's fine. But otherwise, if you want to have your video up, particularly when you get in small groups, that just might be easier to connect if you see a person. So does anyone have any questions before I just start getting into what we're going to do today? No? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about prompts. I'm sure all of you have done prompts of some kind in your life. The thing I like about a prompt is that if you, I'll say what the prompt is. I'm going to wait. I won't tell, I'll tell you in a few minutes, but what the prompt is, the trick is, at least what I think the trick is just to go with the first thing that comes to your mind. Because once you start thinking too hard, the editing part of your brain comes in. And so the really useful thing is just to see like, well, what comes up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, actually, I think, Megan, if you're going to put the admin availability to me now, I'm going to put us into breakout rooms. And so you're going to go into breakout rooms with, what is there? There's 1, 2, 3. You're going to be in groups of 3. And so you're each going to have 1 minute to just, from the prompt, just kind of tell as much detail of a story that comes to mind from the prompt. And then we're going to come back as a group and kind of talk about that. So that's just to get a little taste of the prompt. And then from that, we're going to build into stories. Does everybody know what we're going to do? So I can't keep time on the breakouts. So in each breakout, someone just keep time and each person just gets 1 minute. And then if you haven't been in the breakouts before, Zoom will just kick you into the room and then it will kick you out of the room. So anyway, so let me go into the breakout and do this. So, so the prompt it's a very simple prompt. It's not like an intense prompt. So what was either a favorite toy you had as a kid, or what is a toy that you always wanted and never got? So that's your prompt. Don't overthink it. And you're going to be in a breakout room in a minute. So 3, 6, 9. Okay, so it's 4 rooms. Okay. All right. See you all. Okay, so Lila, she's not in, she's with us without a room. I don't know why. Can you hear me, Lila? Oh, there she goes.
Maybe she just didn't click the button.
Okay. All right, I just got to time this now.
Cool.
Oh.
I was the only one in my breakout room.
Oh, because you're supposed to be with Megan.
Yeah, you probably got grouped with us and we don't join them, sorry.
So no, Megan's gone now. Well, where's Megan?
Megan's still here, she's just muted.
Well, now she's
yeah.
gone. Well, Katie, why don't you go back and see if Megan's in there?
Yeah.
Can I go back? How do I go? Oh.
Yeah, so it's the 3 buttons on the bottom.
I can move you.
I'll go try.
Okay. Okay. Is she there by herself though? I think she's there by herself.
I don't think that I can see the breakout rooms.
I can see it and she's there by herself.
Weird, I wonder where Megan went. Can you just push her into a different room or no?
Well, she can, let's see. Well, she'll come back if she's, yeah, no, what's her, oh, she's back. All right, Katie, I don't know what happened, but why don't you, Sarah, do you want to keep track of time and let me know when a minute's gone by?
Yep.
So why don't you just tell me, we'll do it together.
All right. So my favorite childhood toy was probably any Barbie, but very specifically, I got I don't remember the name of the Barbie anymore, but she came with a dolphin, like a real plastic dolphin that you could put in the bathtub, and she would hold on to the dolphin and you could swim, or she could swim in the bathtub with you. So that was my favorite toy that I had because dolphins are my favorite animal, and it felt like I was swimming with the Barbie in the bathtub.
That's cool. I never heard of that dolphin Barbie.
No, I never had it either. I don't know where my mom found it.
Sarah, one of us could do you have one, or do you want me to do one?
You go ahead first, then I'll go next.
I don't think we both have time because we started so late.
All right. Sure, I'll go. I had a favorite toy that was a Pikachu. So when I was like 5 years old, I went to Japan with my mom because she's adopted. So we went to go visit my biological grandmother, and Pokemon was like a really huge thing before it was he in America is in Japan. And I got like this gigantic stuffed Pikachu toy when I was like 5 years old. And it was my favorite toy for a very long time. And now my nieces actually have it. So it's kind of stayed in the family.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna close the breakout rooms because it takes like a full minute, and then I'll
Okay.
share a story, and at some point we'll just be kicked out. Oh, we
Sounds
won't
good.
be kicked out actually, but anyway.
Because we're in the main room.
It's been really good. Okay.
Great.
So actually my favorite toy, so my family owned an appliance store, and so I was one of the first people to have the Sony Walkmans, those plastic Sony Walkmans. And oh, everyone's coming back. Okay. So, did you guys come back on your own, or did you get kicked out? Julie?
We had like 50 seconds left.
Okay.
Booted out.
Okay. Oh yeah, here we go. So oh, you guys can see the countdown clock from your breakout room? I guess so, yeah.
Only when it's about done, you get like a minute warning that you're going to be booted back.
Well, when I start to boot you, it starts a minute clock. All right, everyone's back. Or is everyone back? Yes, I think so. Okay, so one thing, so just unmute yourself if somebody wants to share a detail or two that really stuck out in your mind from what the person in your group shared.
I'll go ahead and go first.
Yeah.
One thing that really stuck out to me was I had absolutely never heard of one of the toys, and then I had definitely heard of one of the other toys. And both kind of like, I guess I vaguely know about the one toy. It was like a Barbie, but I had never heard of the specific Barbie. And then the other toy was a Walkman, which is a very iconic like thing in musical history to me, like being able to take music mobile with you, but also privately.
Great. Anyone else have a detail that stuck out from the sort of mini story you heard?
I just briefly mentioned that one of her toys was something that she could play with alone or with, I think she said like siblings or friends. And I thought that was like an interesting, like that prompted like a question for me around like what her childhood was like, I guess, and what the purpose of toys was for her.
So that is a great point. Was that Rachel who said that?
Yeah.
Okay. Because one of the things that I find useful in doing a prompt, and so I always suggest that if people are thinking through a story of any kind, it's always good to sort of share your ideas or your thoughts with someone and then hear what interests them. Because when you're telling a story of any kind, and some of you were interested in writing, and I recently finished a book. It's the same with writing, is deciding what to leave in a story is as important to the craft as deciding what to put in. And so you can't give every example. So it's really good to settle into like one or two examples and really share a lot of details. So if you know that, oh, someone's interested in this element of the story I just shared, so that's your clue that maybe that's where you want to settle in and spend more time in a story, so it's a good clue. Anyone else have a detail they want to share from what they heard? What stuck out to them?
This is Mark. I was paired with Bridget. I thought it was interesting. Believe it or not, both of us still have our toy after all those years.
So that's super. So how many years was that? Like we're talking like 20, 30, 40 years, right? You've had it a long time.
20 or 30? Yeah, I'll go with 20 or 30, sure.
Yeah.
That'll work. Times two.
Right. So, I mean, the thing that's kind of interesting about that, like depending upon if you were going to have that, as a story or part of a story is like, how many moves did that toy make, right? If you think of that movie, everyone loves Toy Story, right? Like, so how many boxes was that in? Like, how many rooms of the house? Like, how many times was it almost thrown out, and why wasn't? So that's just an interest. So that's like an interesting thing. So the thing about a prompt for me is, again, it helps you sort of excavate stories that you might not have known you found interesting about your life. And the handout, which I think you guys probably got by email, I gave lots of examples of prompts. And for me, I mean, anytime I'm stuck, you know, I just play around with prompts and just see what ideas come down. And then I'm going to get into this in terms of how do you build it out to a story? Like, then how do you take this answer to your prompt, which really gets you to like an anecdote, and how do you pull the threads on that anecdote to get to a story? So that's just a quick example of a prompt. You know, like I said, I think I probably gave like 10 examples on the handout, but you know, you can come up with your own prompts too. So, okay. So I'm going to talk about, well, does anyone have any questions or anything else I want to add about that?
For those of us who are challenged, is there like a website or an app you can go to get prompts?
So I'm pretty sure if you like Google, you know, storytelling prompts, like you'll get something. You know, from the whatever I put on there, the 10 I put on there, you could riff off of those too. You know, you could be like, oh, well, that prompt makes me think of this prompt. But, you know, anything's a prompt. Like, you know, what was your favorite job and why? You know, or what was the worst job you ever had? You know, because there's something there for all that. But you could Google for more prompts. Okay, so I want to talk about the 5 beats to a story, which I think is, if you're looking, you don't have to look at the handout, but it's on the handout. So I find these 5 beats super useful. I use them all the time, you know, so if I'm ever trying to put together a story and I'm now a little sort of, you know, overconfident about stories, like I feel like, oh, I know how to put together a story. But if it's not coming together well, I'll like, oh, let me just make sure I have the 5 elements. And usually I don't have them all, which is why it wasn't coming together well. And I use this a lot when I was writing my book when I got stuck as well. So the thing about, if you're putting together, you know, a 5 to 8 minute story, you know, so I don't know if it plays out differently. I don't know which one of you is interested in, does documentary work, but you sort of want almost everything you put in there to be in service to the story, right? So it sort of goes back to that idea that I said, that what you put in and what you take out are equally hard decisions. And so, you know, you really need to think about, or at least I really think about, how do I want to introduce myself to the story? Because we're all multifaceted. We all have so many things we could say about ourselves. But, you know, if I'm going to tell you that, you know, I was the best, you know, hula hooper, you know, in New York, and then, you know, I tell you a story about my family small business and the fact that hula hoop never shows up again. I mean, you might be like, well, why did she say that? And that might not be the best example, but you just want to think about what about you is useful to that story. And the other thing is, if you're about to tell a story where you've done some things that were pretty hard, or you're going to say things about yourself in the story that, you know, might not necessarily be easily popular, you want to make sure you're getting the audience on your side right away. So you just want to think about how you introduce yourself. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute. And then, but then the next thing to think about is, like, what gets the story going? You know, like, what's the inciting incident? You know, you locked your, you know, your wedding dress in the car on your wedding day, and you don't have any keys, and you don't have a sledgehammer, and you don't know how to get in the car. You know, what are you going to do? So that's what kind of gets the story going. It gets, you know, people's interest. And then the real work of putting together a story is, like, how do you increase the tension from that moment when the story gets started to the main event, you know, where it's like, so you're taking the story to a moment, that's like the main event. So how do you keep people's interest from when the story starts to the main event? And the thing about a main event, and again, I'm going to give an example in a minute, is you can end a story at the main event. It's usually pretty satisfying. I got the dress out, you know, and I got married, or I realized I didn't love him anyhow, so like I walked away, or, you know, whatever the main event is, you could end it there, and that's fine. But usually the stories that stick with us takes it to a resolution. And so that usually pulls in some sort of like universal emotion or personality trait that people can connect with and think like, oh, so that didn't happen to me, but like the emotion of it happened to me, you know, kind of thing. And the reason why that is a useful element in a story is, you know, I've listened to a lot of stories over the last couple of years, and I think one thing that all of us have in common is we all appreciate the opportunity to think about ourselves. And so any story that kind of lets you think about yourself, you know, you're kind of happy about. So just to give a quick example, this is someone I worked with a long time ago. I used to do some work with her. And it was actually, I think, when we first started the Moth, and she said, I want to try telling a story. And so she was trying to work out a story. And she had spent several years in Tachita Women's Prison. And she wanted to tell a story about that experience, but she didn't want it to be a, like, this is what prison life is like. Like, she wanted to come at it from a different angle. So how she started the story was she just let us know she was in prison, and that she really loves to drink. She loves like an ice cold Coke, you know, with ice in a mug. Like that's like, you know, just like a pleasure of hers. And so, and she let us know like how many minutes, how many hours, how many days she had to work in prison to earn enough money to buy a soda. So what we learned from that is we know she's in prison, you know, she likes cold soda, and we also get a sense of, yeah, like people are paid like 3 cents an hour or something like that in prison. So you get a sort of a sense of that. She doesn't let us know how long she's in for. She doesn't let us know what she's in for, and we don't really need to know for the purpose of this story. So the inciting incident, what got the story going, is she earned enough money to buy soda. So, so great. So now the story is happening. So she gets her soda. She had a mug, and so now she needed ice. She goes to get the ice. So whoever the man was who sort of was in charge of the kitchen, he decides, yeah, I don't want to give you any ice. And he could make that decision randomly if he wanted to. But she happened to know that his mom was the nurse in the prison, and she was friendly with the nurse. So she went to the mother went to the son, and then she got her ice, right? So that's sort of how she kept raising the stake. Like, is she going to get the ice? So she gets the ice, she puts the ice in the mug, she pours the soda on top of the ice in the mug, and she drinks her soda, right? And it was this totally satisfying moment. And she could have ended the story there, and that would have been great. But she ends it later when she's out of prison and she has her own apartment. You know, sort of re-entry into the community is tough. She has hard days. But she says, like, whenever she's feeling really down, she'll like open up the freezer, where she has stacked the freezer with like 20 ice cube trays that, you know, is filled with ice. And she does, okay, like, I'm doing okay, you know. So that just sort of adds an extra element to it. So that's just a quick example of kind of the 5 elements to a story. And what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to listen to one, and then we're going to kind of break it down together. But before we do that, does anyone have any sort of questions or comments or thoughts on that before we go on? All right, so I'm hopefully going to share a screen correctly. So this is a story. I don't know this woman, but I like this story because I think a lot of people, when, at least in the workshops I've taught, when they're first thinking about telling a story, they usually kind of go back to like a strong childhood memory. And they have a story of a moment in their childhood. And so the reason why I like this story is, you know, you'll see when you listen, like there's a thing that happened that she likes this and she wants to tell a story about it. And then she kind of built around it to give it some oomph. So when I play it, I want you just to kind of either mentally or on paper take notes. How did she introduce herself? How did the story start? How did she increase the tension? What was the main event? What was the resolution? So does that make sense? Everyone got it? Okay. Share screen, share computer sound. Okay. All right, so everybody, you don't really need to see it, you just need to hear it, but okay. Let me know, thumbs up if you can hear it once I start. Okay.
Summer 1985. I'm about 8 years old. Not much I knew at 8 years old. I mean, I knew some things. Like I knew that it was hot. It was only 8 o'clock and I'm already sticking to myself, it's hot. I knew that in about 30 minutes, all my cousins were gonna come barreling through that door because my grandma took it upon herself to babysit all 10 of us. All day, all summer. I also knew that at 11:55 a.m., she was going to let us go outside, unsupervised, to play in the fire hydrant. Why 11:55? because that gave her 5 minutes to throw a mango and a fruit box or juice box at us so that she could catch her first novela. Because she loved her novelas, that I knew. So sure enough, 11:55 came around, we put on our jelly sandals, she threw some juice box and mango, váyanse. And we were gone. God help us if we interrupted her. Now, we're outside having a ball. You see, it was an especially happy day because somebody the night before had forgotten to turn off the fire hydrant. And it had flooded the entire block. We weren't great, I'm sorry. And so this was our water park. And for a poor little girl in Humboldt Park where you couldn't go to the beach or the pool because they were shooting it up, this was where it's at. And so I knew at 8 years old that I needed me some of that. So there we are, running around for unsupervised, because my grandma was mean, so having a break from her was just like, yes, yes. And we turned abandoned cars into slip and slides, and there was not a spot on the block that you could walk on without splashing water. This was heaven. You know, around 2, 3 o'clock when the parents started getting home, it was like an unwritten rule that you just rolled your pants up, took your shoes off, walked to your front door. Or if you had nylons on, you went around the alley. But anyway, it was unwritten rule. Everyone knew it. Everyone except Doña Lupe. You see, Doña Lupe lived at the opposite end of the corner of the fire hydrant. So she was walking today through the water, pushing her stroller with her little baby Angel. Not an actual angel baby, but like her baby named Angel, who she thought was an angel. And I'm playing this mean game of tag with my cousin Susie, and I'm running past Doña Lupe, and I zip right past her, and then Susie, who's supposed to be right behind me, is not behind me, and I turn around to witness Doña Lupe grabbing her by the arm and taking off her sandal and hitting her on the opposite arm. Watch where you're going. You splashed my son in the face with water. Susie grabs her arm, crosses the street, starts crying on the porch. I follow behind her like, girl, you better go tell grandma. And through her tears and her snot, she's just like, I can't because she's watching her novelas. And I'm like, you got a point. You got a point. But this is not right. I know this. At 8 years old, I know that this is not right, so I'm gonna go tell her. I'm the oldest girl cousin. I'm gonna go tell her. So I run upstairs and I'm just like, I'm gonna tell my grandma. And I get to her French doors that lead to her room, and I see her feet, and I freeze. And I decide to wait for a commercial. But she hears me and she's like, ¿Quién anda ya? Soy yo, it's me, Lily. ¿Qué quieres? Well, you see, we were playing in the street and someone hit Susie. Click. ¿Cómo? Which was a rhetorical question because she was already putting her shoes on and grabbing me by the arm and started dragging me down the stairs. Let's go. She passes my cousin at the bottom step and she looks at her and says, ¿Y tú pendeja, por qué no dices nada? And drags us to the corner. We get to the corner and, you know, back then we don't use doorbells. My grandma, Doña Lupe! And she looks out the window. ¿Sí, Doña María? Que tú le pegaste a mi nieta. She starts to explain why she hit her. Well, you know, she splashed my son. Well, like your son is made of sugar? Ven pa' acá. Ven pa' acá. And she comes downstairs. They proceed to lip box for about 10 minutes, lip boxing, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until Doña Lupe says, well, maybe you should watch your children. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Y'all already know. Y'all already know. And that is when my grandma snapped and just punched, like rock'em sock'em robots. They never moved from where they were, and they just punch, and they just punch. Never moved, until one of them, not my grandma, broke down like a rock'em sock'em robot and just begged, please, please, please. Ya no me pegues, ya no me pegues. And my grandma stopped, wiped her hands on her apron, went back to watch novelas. Before she walked inside, she said, no hagan lo que hago. And God help you if you interrupt me again. I said I didn't know much at 8 years old. But that day, I knew my grandma loved me. I knew it from the bottom of my heart. She beat that lady's ass. And today, standing here, I know she's up there, proud as saying, ya ves, cabrona, ¿qué te dije? Thank you.
All right. Can everyone hear me? We're back? Yes. So before we get into just your general thoughts on the story, let's think about how she built this. Keeping in mind, I don't know her, but let's just think about like, how did she introduce herself? What did she let us know for this story? Just yell out the answer if you.
That she was 8 years old.
Yeah, we knew she was young. That's pretty much it. She did let us know one more thing that I think is useful.
I knew she was poor.
Yeah, we got to sense she's poor because her grandmother's watching like her and all her cousins, right? So we sort of know,
Well,
like,
she said it like explicitly.
yeah. So, and I think that's all we needed to know. We just need to know she's young. There's a whole bunch of them, and they don't have a whole lot of money. So,
Summertime.
was that Katie?
Yeah, it was summertime was one of the.
Yeah, it was summertime. Yep. So as you can see, we didn't need to know a whole lot. That was just enough for this story. So what do you think got the action going in the story? Like, what really got it going?
Well, she let us outside and painted this visual picture playing in the water that had been running all night, and everybody was there, and then kind of guided us to when folks are coming home at the end of the day, and introduced us to this character who, you know, she set up as not kind of part of the group, but she had her baby stroller and was on the other side of the street, the bad side of the street, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think just for that first part you said, Mark, I mean, it doesn't particularly matter, but, you know, I find it useful just to sort of, you know, chunk out each part. So if you think about how did you introduce it, yeah, that the water, it was like the perfect day because the water was running, you know, and that they were out there unsupervised with the water. And so once that started, then all the action followed suit. So yeah, so that's how the story got going. So then along the lines of what Mark was saying in the second part, so how did she keep our interest, right? So she's taken us to the main event. So she's kind of raising the tension and raising the stakes. So how did she do that? How did she keep your interest in the story? What were the plot points she used?
I thought it was interesting that she said they were not to interrupt their grandma. So you kind of knew that, okay, something was going to happen where they were going to have to interrupt her. And I was curious about how she would react.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice thing that she set up right away. Like, don't interrupt her. She loves her novellas. So you had a sense something was going to happen. And then she did sort of circle back to that too at the end. But yeah, so she's not supposed to bother her grandmother. But then, you know, as Mark said, something happened to her cousin, so she had to bother her grandmother, and so then, you know, so then it just kept. She had to bother grandmother. The grandmother came out, you know, yelled down to the Doña Lupe, you know, and they have this argument, and then we get to the main event, right? And so the main event, you know, was the fight between the grandmother and Doña Lupe. And so in my mind, I mean, again, I don't know the woman who told the story, but if you think about, you know, you have these like really vivid childhood memories, I would imagine watching your grandmother get into a fist fight, you know, with the neighbor that no one likes. Like you're going to remember that, you know. So that was the main event. And so she could have ended it there with the fight. That would have been fine. But she did add a little more. So what did you think about, what did you think the resolution was, and what did you think about the resolution?
Well, I think she wrapped it up nicely because she kind of bookended it. She started out the beginning of the story with, I don't know much, but this I know. And then she also ended it with, you know, I don't know much, but that day I know my grandmother loved me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you kind of, I just want to, you know, add on to that, you know, I agree with you. And so sometimes when you're listening to stories, and I'll put in the chat some other examples to listen to, because some stories like have really well developed, really powerful resolutions, and they spend a lot of time on that in their story. This one, I think, was really mostly about telling the action. And so again, I don't know how she put it, but so if she wanted to end it with, you know, I know my grandmother loves me, like that's the resolution I want to do. You know, sometimes you have to like reverse engineer a story. So that only makes sense if you then in the front say, I don't know what my grandmother thinks about me. You know what I mean? Like, so you have to make sure that if you have a resolution that you want to do, you set up the resolution earlier in the story so it makes sense. You know, so that's how I think, that's what I think a resolution is as well. Anything, I don't want to spend too much more time on this because it's time is moving forward here, but is there anything anyone wants to say about what they particularly liked that she did as a storyteller, or something that, you know, that didn't work for you that much?
I like that she included phrases in Spanish, even though I only know about 20 words of Spanish, because I felt like it gave it some color and a sense of, you know, her family, and you still understood what was going on even if you didn't know what those phrases meant.
Yeah, I think she did a nice job of having whatever she said next kind of give you context for what she said in Spanish if you didn't know. Yeah, anything else? I just want to point out like one or two things she did that I think is a good thing to do in storytelling. Is I think it's different than writing, where sometimes you don't want to have to like spell out like word for word what you're thinking. So she said something at one point. She said, well, I'm the oldest girl cousin, so I had to do it. So right there, she gave us some important information about her, you know, that like the responsibilities that come with being the oldest, and that's why, you know, she did it. And then she said something about if you live in a neighborhood, I don't remember how she said it, but if in a neighborhood where there's shooting at the pool, like you can't go to the pool, you know, which is why you need to, you know, why it's a big deal to have the fire hydrant open. So she just, you know, kind of let you know a bunch of things without explaining it too much. So I thought she did a good job with that. Anything else before I move on? Okay. So I guess, what is it? So I guess there's just two more things I want to say. Then we're just going to do a screen share to kind of show you an exercise to connect an anecdote to like a larger theme. But one thing for those of you who are actually interested in telling a story in front of an audience at some point, if that's what your interest is, I think just a really good thing to keep in mind is an audience responds as much to what the story is about as to how the storyteller feels about telling the story. So, you know, you should really only tell a story that you're excited to tell. People have gotten up and told really sort of like important stories about important topics, but the audience didn't connect to it because you could tell that they had ambivalence about telling the story, kind of thing. So, and then the Moth has this phrase that I like, which is tell stories from your scars and not your wounds. So that's also good to think about. So that's just one tip. The other thing is, you know, with this idea of an anecdote kind of being the seed to a story. So I'm just gonna quickly just take you through like one of the stories that I've told, just to show you like what you can do with an anecdote, because every anecdote you have, there's like 10 different threads you could pull, you know, there's 10 different stories you could tell about that anecdote. So just very, very briefly, I have this anecdote that's kind of funny where I'm from New York City. My kids are 2 and 4. I was visiting my parents. My dad's driving us to the airport. We have, you know, I decided the last plane of the day because I thought my kids would sleep on the plane. I've never flew with them before. And we hit Lincoln Tunnel, and there's all this traffic, and it becomes clear, oh, we might not make this flight. And so like I'm sort of panicking, my dad's sort of panicking for no good reason. And anyhow, he's an engineer guy, and he's doing the math, and he's like, you know what, if we get out of this tunnel in like 3 minutes and I speed, like we might do it. And anyhow, and my 2-year-old says that she needs to pee. And of course I know that she means like now. And that there will be no running through the airport if I don't figure out how to get her to pee, but there's no time, right? So I dump out a bag of food, and I tell her to get out of a car seat and to pee over this plastic bag, right? So she's peeing hot urine into this plastic bag. And then my 4-year-old's like, I have to pee. So like he's peeing in the plastic bag. And me and my dad's like, okay, I'm about to get out of this tunnel, and I'm going 80. You know, you got to get him back in the car seat, and you got to get rid of the bag of urine. And I'm like, what am I? So anyway, so they get back in the car seat, maybe, like I can't help them. And then I drip the urine out the car, you know, and we get to the airport, right? And so there's a lot to it. We all have those sort of funny anecdotes, like from our life, right? So then the question is, so someone's like, we should tell that story. I'm like, well, what is the story, right? So you could pull any thread. So I could turn this into a story about me and my daughter, because she has been late for everything her entire life. You know, this could be a story about her. It could be a story about my relationship to New York City versus the Midwest, you know, and like I could do a story around that, you know. And so I sort of pull the threads to see what interests me. And I decide the best story is actually the father-daughter relationship. That, you know, the reason why, like the idea of missing this plane was devastating is my parents' marriage was imploding. And their marriage was imploding because we all learned that my dad had sunk all their retirement into his failing family business, you know, and that takes me to my growing up in this store and how I used to idolize my dad as a salesman, and how like he's fallen from grace. And I realized like my dad ended up getting some guy to like run us into the airport, and so I was able to do a whole like I should always believe that my dad can make a sale, like, you know. So anyhow, so my point is that any anecdote you have, just follow every thread and you'll see which one resonates more with you, because there's meat in every anecdote, you know, that can go in lots of directions. So if that kind of makes sense, I want to take us to a screen share and then have maybe practice with that a little bit. So does anyone have any questions or anything before I take us to a screen share? Okay, here we go. Okay, does everyone see a whiteboard? Yay, I'm always happy when this works. Okay. But why? Oh, here we go. So I can't move all your pictures are in the middle of, there we go. Okay. Oh, now you're at the bottom. All right, whatever. So, so what I find useful, and I think I've heard this called a mind map, so you might be familiar with this. Sorry for the bad art. And so I'm just gonna have us go through this 2 ways. I think of this as like a spoke on a wheel. So somebody just throw out like an emotion, any emotion.
Jubilation.
Jubilation?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't know if I spelled that right, but okay, so jubilation. So now just quickly, what comes to mind, you know, whether it's another word or something from your own life, like what comes to mind for jubilation, which means happiness, right? Is that what we're talking about here? Or like really happy, right? Yeah, okay.
Skinny dipping under a waterfall.
Skinny dipping. I'm just gonna do skinny dipping for now. Okay, just keep yelling out things.
Party
Play.
time.
Parties, someone said parties?
Yeah.
Last day of school.
Last day of school, I'm gonna say ice cream, last day of school. Okay. Okay, so for parties, let's see, draw. There. Sorry, I'm bad with this thing here. Okay, so just what are things that come to mind for parties?
Birthday, graduation.
Birthday, graduation,
Drinking.
drinking,
Friends.
food, friends. So, sorry, typing. So you know, the thing with this that truly like works all the time for me is, you just keep doing these spokes until it gets you, like, it sounds like right away someone got to skinny dipping under the waterfall. Like, you do this until it gets you to an anecdote. And then that helps you see that this anecdote is connected to joy. You know, so that could just be useful. Like when you start then building a story about that anecdote, you sort of know that like the theme through that is jubilation. Like the one that I told, you know, with me and my dad. So maybe like sort of like it was sort of lost and found, sort of, you know, that was kind of the theme of that a little bit. So anyway, this is just in exchange for a prompt. This is pretty useful, but I want to, because several of you said what you were interested in is writing. That's why is this not? Okay. So I'm just going to just show you an example of whenever I got stuck writing my book, this really helped me. So my book was about a family business my family owned for 80 years. So there's like 3 different ways that this was helpful. So one was, okay, so if it's because it's about an inanimate object, you know, a store, well, what's a big part of a store? Well, in New York City, it's the window front is like, you know, thousands of people walk by the window front. Sorry, can't spell. So then, you know, I sort of did this. Okay, so well, what did you see from the window? And then that took me to, you know, my grandfather in the 30s fixed sick radios in the window, and that's why the store is called Radio Clinic. I played video games in the 70s in the window. You know, the store was looted and the window was destroyed. And my dad put up this "We Are Staying" sign that was a big deal in the neighborhood. And then eventually with gentrification, there was a lost our lease, right? So that really helped me see like, oh, there's a story that can be told through this inanimate object. And then, but then if then I thought about, well, how, like, what are emotions that would be useful for telling the story? So then, you know, I sort of did the thing that I just did before, which is, okay, well, what are joyful stories about the store? You know, so then I was like, you know, playing video games in the window was joyful. You know, when my dad taught, had these like air conditioner repair workshops for women in the neighborhood, like that was joyful. Like I could sort of think of all the things that were joyful. You know, then I could, you know, then I did the opposite. Then I put in here like, well, what was sad, you know, so then sad, you know, then I, you know, it just really helps you generate a whole bunch of anecdotes, right? And so then you have your anecdotes, whether it's for a book or a story, and then you think about, well, which anecdote has the most meat in it, you know, and like, what thread do I want to pull? And then once you kind of get that clear in your mind, then I use those 5 steps, you know, to then like, well, how do I take this and kind of punch it up in a way that brings in details that really engage people. I'm going to take us out of this, unless anyone. So anyhow, has anyone done anything like that? Like, you know, again, I think I've heard it called mind mapping. Have you done that in other aspects of your life or work? Someone was nodding their head. Bridget, you've used that? Or Megan?
Mm-hmm.
So have you ever tried it with like storytelling or just trying to pull out stories?
No, not exactly like that. I've used it like as a way to try to organize ideas at like, I guess around themes, like for artwork, for example, or like big projects I have going on. But I like the idea of using it to find stories. I hadn't thought about doing it that way.
You know, I think for people who are visual learners, they find it super useful. You know, the way I used to talk about this, because this is how I used to do it before, there's like, you know, I like to make columns on paper. And then, you know, I think of like, well, what are some personality traits I have? Like, I'm very anxious, or, you know, I love a good romantic comedy, or like whatever the thing is. And then I think of like, and one time or but one time. So like, and one time, like, will take me to an anecdote like, so I love romantic comedies, and the day I was going to propose to my boyfriend, I took the day off of work and watched romantic comedies all day to get in the mood, right? So that anecdote kind of proves my point. Or you could have an anecdote that like disproves your point, sort of. And so anyhow, I used to kind of use that to help people think about how do you take an anecdote and connect it to a personality trait or emotion. But I find that this visual way, I just think there's more visual learners. So I highly recommend it. It's super useful. And then again, then layer in those 5 steps. And if you're, you know, I used it all the time writing my book. If I got stuck somewhere and I was just having a hard time bringing that section to life, that it felt too flat, I would just pick out some moments in that and say, well, what would that look like if I turned it into like a 5 to 8 minute story? Like, how would I, if that was all I was doing, like, how would that look? And then it just gave me so much more to work with. So I really do sort of swear by using that. Oh, I'm supposed to make Megan the host. Sorry. Megan, I don't remember what I do here to make you the host. Can you unmute so you can tell me?
Yep, if you go to the participant tab.
Oh yeah, okay.
And then you'll click on more.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks.
Okay. So anyhow, so it's almost 8, so I'm gonna wrap up. But that in the handout I gave you, I gave some examples. So I co-host this podcast with Tequila Benton, and we really talk to people about how they put together their story. And so some of the people on the podcast are really experienced storytellers or comedians. So I flag those because you might find those conversations interesting about what they did and why and putting together their story. Does anyone have any questions for the last few minutes?
It was just really interesting, and like hearing that woman that spoke was just so, when someone tells a really good story, it's really captivating and it just draws you in. And I think that, you know, artists can use that same mentality as writing a compelling story, whether it's about themselves, their work, their biography, really using those skills to talk about their album or any of those pieces. I think it's just really inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing those tips and tools. Hopefully everyone will have an opportunity to put those to practice for your art and creativity. And who knows, maybe you could write your own book one day. Make sure you check out Jen, what is the name of your book so we can let everyone know what that is?
Well, I'll just write it down. It's called We Are Staying, 80 Years in the Life of a Family, a Store, in a Neighborhood. One thing I just want to say, Megan, you made me think of that. So, so Lily B, who we listened to, she sure seems like someone who could like probably engagingly read the phone book. Like she just seems like she's pretty charismatic. Like she knew how to respond to the audience. And so one thing like it was super useful for me when I first started telling stories is you're bringing yourself to the storytelling. So if you're not charismatic in that way, like you're just not. So you have to think about what are your strengths and weaknesses. Like someone once asked me, you know, should I be funny when I tell a story? And so my answer is always, you know, well, are you funny? You know, because if you're not funny and you try to be funny and then no one laughs, you're 100% derailed. Like you can't think of anything else, you know, the whole time. So anyhow, so just think about who are you? What are your skills? What are your strengths and weaknesses? You know, so, but that's only if you want to tell a story on stage or, you know. Anyhow, sorry.
And I do also want to mention that Jen has an article that she's following 3 small business owners throughout this pandemic, and it's in the Isthmus. Is that correct, Jen?
Yep.
So make sure you check that out. There's been 2 articles posted. They're really inspiring, and it's really interesting to hear from the 3 different business owners, sort of their perspective as they manage their small business ownership, especially throughout this pandemic, and the ways that they've had to pivot that no one ever could have imagined we might need to pivot. So, you know, check that out. Also, again, reminder to check out Dane Arts and sign up for their newsletter. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll have another workshop coming up very soon. So with that, it is 8 o'clock. We will say good evening and thanks so much for joining us at DABL Workshops.
Bye, everyone.